Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari, and today marks the long return of the series where I take 24 hours to read a YA series. Previously featured on this, I've read some of the newer YA series, Grishaverse, The Raven Cycle, ACOTAR, Throne of Glass, and then some older ones like The Program and House of Night. So House of Night was actually one of my most popular videos of all time, at least the second half of it, because House of Night is long. The success of that video kind of inspired me to renew this series and start reading YA dystopian series that were popular in the 2010s mostly. I'm not doing Twilight, I'm not doing Hunger Games, but these are books that were kind of inspired by those. Like, Twilight, Hunger Games took off, and then these were the titles that followed that we were all a little obsessed with, and in hindsight as adults, I'm here to explore what the fuck were we thinking? I recently had a poll in my community tab asking for you all to vote for the next series that I read, and it was neck and neck. Like, who was in first place would change every single day. And in the end, as you saw probably from the title, the Divergent series won. So I'm reading this one in this video, and then fairly soon, probably next month, I will do the Ugly series, which was, right behind Divergent. Now, as I get into Divergent, a little bit of housekeeping. First off, if this is your favorite series, that's great. I am so happy that you enjoy these books. The entire purpose of this video series that I have is to trash talk these series a little bit. Even if I enjoy the books, they're problematic through our modern lens, and I am going to talk about those problems. There will also be spoilers. I can't do a video on a series and just give you a vague outline. There wouldn't be much of a video. So there will be spoilers throughout. So if you haven't read the Divergent series and you still plan to and you're still avoiding spoilers, I am just proud of you, and B, this isn't the video for you. Before I get back into these books, it's been years and years and years since I've read them, and I want to give my thoughts ahead of me going back in here. For some reason I have it in my head that the Divergent series was single-handedly responsible for killing off the entire YA dystopian genre. Why is it that the end of this series was so shockingly bad that everybody was like, I'm done reading, I quit reading, and then everybody stopped reading until smutty fairy romance started becoming popular again. But I just feel like the ending of the series was going for the George R.R. Martin shock value of Game of Thrones, but missed the mark there and just ended up pissing everybody off. The ending of this book series was so bad that the movies based on the series were never complete. The fourth movie, which was called Ascendant, never got released because the ending was so bad. Just everybody wanted to forget that it happened. This book series scarred a generation of readers, and we're going to revisit it today. How this works is I have a stopwatch on my phone right here. I am going to hit start, and I have 24 hours to complete these books. I should be able to get it done. I've read much more than this in 24 hours, but still a timer on it. Let's get going. All right, we're at an hour and 4 minutes in and at 105 pages. Let's see what's going on in Divergent so far. As expected, I'm being introduced to the world and the character. Our main character's name is Triss. Triss is very much a reader insert type of character. You're supposed to be able to imagine yourself as Triss. So she doesn't have a whole lot of description, and what description she has is pretty generic or spread out in a way that is easy to miss. She's described as clumsy, which is really funny because there's literally one scene of her being clumsy and then it's never brought up again. But she like trips over somebody else's foot and she's like, I've always been kind of clumsy because, you know, every teenage girl growing and going through puberty is a little bit clumsy. You're coltish. She's blonde and blue-eyed, which it's really just like a single reference to her being blonde and a single reference to her eye color, which are probably a good like 40-50 pages apart from each other, if not more. She's curious when she's not supposed to be, which sounds like every teenage girl I've ever met. And she's striking, not pretty. Because many teenage girls, especially during this time, never thought of themselves as pretty. You're never good enough because media tells you you're not good enough. But you can be striking. You can be attractive to the right man. But you're not really pretty. This takes place in a dystopian Chicago, and I'm actually going to quote from the book to kind of explain this society because Veronica Roth is going to do a justice that I can't. Decades ago, our ancestors realized that it is not political ideology, religious belief, race, or nationalism that is to blame for a warring world. Rather, they determined that it was the fault of human personality. So 5 different factions decided that 5 different personality traits are the problem with humanity, and each faction tries to live in a way that directly counters the personality trait that they think is the problem. The people who blamed aggression formed amity. The people who blamed ignorance formed erudite. The people who blamed duplicity formed candor. The people who blamed selfishness formed abnegation. And the people who blamed cowardice were the dauntless. Those are your 5 faction, and then you have the factionless, which is an entirely different thing. They're basically people who fail out of their initiation programs or whatever. They're unwanted, homeless. So we are presented in the first 100 pages or so with all of this information, and it's always the author's goal is to give you all this information you need to know about the universe, but not just like info dump it on you. I mean, some authors do, but the ideal is to find a way to present this to the reader in a way that makes sense in the universe. And the way Veronica Roth handles this is in their 16th year, every youth is given the chance to join the faction that they feel fits them most. There's a test that you have to go through that helps you kind of determine what faction you fit in best with, and then you actually get to choose. And you don't have to choose what the test tells you. You can choose whatever feels closest to your heart, but the test kind of gives you the ability to like narrow down your inner thoughts and feelings. Because Triss, our main character, is at 16 years old and she has to choose, she's really thinking about all of the different factions in her society, which enables us to get that information dumped onto us in a way that makes sense with what's going on with Triss's character. We really only get 2 because Triss was born into abnegation, but she becomes dauntless. So those are the 2 we really focus on. Abnegation is very much like selflessness. So she eats plain food, is supposed to look plain, supposed to look like everybody else. She's supposed to, you know, not ever focus on herself, but everybody else around her. And dauntless is like fearless. So, and they're like wild childs, the guys with the tattoos and the black clothing and the edgy eyeliner, that sort of thing. Erudite is kind of mentioned a couple of times because there seems to be like an interfaction war between abnegation and erudite. So you kind of get a little bit of erudite then. We are going to see more later in the series with erudite, but introduction here. Also, Triss's brother chooses to go to Erudite, so that's another little bonus going on there. We also get introduced to a lot of characters, and they're kind of like roles in the book. So I've mentioned Triss and her brother Caleb. So Triss's main character Caleb is kind of like, Caleb and her parents are kind of like what she's left behind. Caleb becomes more important later in the story, but right now he's just like her brother. Nothing special, not really in the story. Then we meet Christina, who is her best friend, and that's pretty much the role she plays in there. There are like 7 other people who are transfers who are going through this Dauntless initiation with her, but right now they are fairly minor characters, and we have been like introduced to their names, but not really much of their personalities outside of Christina. We've also met 2 new characters in like the Dauntless faction that are kind of like educators and leaders. Well, we've met more, but 2 main characters that we're going to focus on right now. Eric, who is a Dauntless leader, and he is being set up as a villain. Like, he's the big bad of this story. He is not the big bad of the entire series, but of this particular first book, he is the bad guy. He is the villain. And then we have 4. We know he's the love interest as readers of this series or people who've watched the movie, but at this point he has not been set up as any sort of love interest. He is just like their teacher, teaching these transfers how to be dauntless. The plot of this book, we've also just been introduced to it. We were almost 100 pages in before we got introduced to the actual plot. The plot is that although they've chosen Dauntless, Dauntless has not chosen them, and they have to go through an initiation period, and only 10 of them make it through, which means 6 of them will be factionless at the end of this initiation period. And that's kind of like the scary thing, is they only have a few months to make it through, and they definitely don't want to be kicked out. But they're all fighting against each other and against the initiates that were raised as Dauntless to get these 10 coveted spots. I don't have any problems with the book so far. It's not like this is the best thing I've ever read, but it's a well-crafted and well-told story so far. And if this was my first time reading it, I would want to continue on with where it's going from here. And I know where it goes, and I know this is going to go downhill, but so far, we're good. I think through the first book we're good. I think it doesn't start going downhill until you get past book 1. Great, happy Saturday morning. I got about 2 hours in, and I'm pretty much halfway through the book. It doesn't quite look halfway here, but there is like a huge chunk at the end of this book that is just bonus materials. So I'm a little over like actually halfway through the book. So I've just hit like the second stage of the initiation. The first stage is everybody like fighting it with each other, seeing how tough they are. Obviously Triss isn't very good at fighting. Like, no one should be surprised by that. She ends up making it through to the second stage, but just barely. She's not like at the bottom. She wasn't like right at the cutoff line, but she wasn't half the top. She's safely kind of in the low end of the middle of the pack where she should be. And those of us who've read this before know that that's about to change, and she's going to shoot right to the top with how she handles the second stage. And she does this by accident. She's just Divergent. Who would have thought? Second stage is you go into this simulation and you have to face your fears. She thinks she's really bad at this, but she's like, what was the quote? She's 3 times faster than anybody else. We've only done the first one, so we haven't really gotten into her and Four's relationship yet, but it does develop during this stage of initiation. There's 2 really big things to take away from this point in the book. One of them is they're starting to discover that the factions aren't what they were supposed to be. Like, they were set up as something good, and you take like one type of personality trait and you hyper focus on that personality trait to do good. But sometimes over like the generations that this has been in effect, something's corrupted and the factions are starting to focus on the wrong things, basically. So in Dauntless, it was supposed to be about facing your fears and protecting others. Facing your fears in a way of like being able to think in a scary situation, being able to process, being able to act in a scary situation in order to protect others. So a fairly selfless idea of I am going to sacrifice myself and be a shield for other people around me. And that's not what it is now. Now it's very prideful and it's all about like who's the toughest, who's the meanest, who wins. And Triss is kind of like starting to see that Dauntless is like this, and then she's also comparing it to what she knows about other factions and kind of saying that, hey, somewhere along the lines the system has been corrupted, which doesn't like matters very little in this book, but it is an important theme to look at throughout the rest of the series. The other thing that's really kind of being hinted at a lot, that's more important coming up soon in this book, is the situation with Al. Al is another one of the initiates that, like transfer initiates, and he's like this really, really big, powerful guy, but he's not doing very well mentally. And as a teenager, I never really paid much attention to how Triss interacts with him and his behavior, but as an adult, it's like, wow. What it's making me personally realize is how easy it is to miss suicidal warning signs from people, especially when you're young and you're so self-centered. And Triss is not a very nice person. Like Al kind of flirts with her a little bit, and she's not interested, which is fine. She doesn't have to be interested at all. But like the way she thinks about him is awful. Like there's one line that I actually wrote down because I was like, oh my God. She said, I couldn't be attracted to anyone that fragile. That was just one of those like, you're not a good person kind of quotes. And that changed, like that one line changed my entire perspective on Triss's character. I don't know why. I do appreciate about this book that there is no love triangle. She is literally interested in Four and no one else. Because I don't really like the love V in books. I never really have. So that's nice. Veronica Roth takes the let's do something refreshing and different a little bit too far at the end of the books, but we still got quite a few hours before we get to that. Well, you've got a few minutes, but I've got a few hours before I get to that. So let's continue on with this book, and I will check back in with you whenever I finish. Because I'm reading the Divergent series this weekend, I mean, I obviously need to fully immerse myself in this world, get the full experience out of it. So I'm gonna try to eat like Triss does. This is obviously a dystopian Chicago, so the food's going to be, you know, attainable. And it's breakfast kind of. It's my first meal of the day, even though it's like 2 in the afternoon. So let's eat a breakfast that we've seen Triss eat, and we've seen a couple other people eat, snack on these things in the book, and that is a banana nut muffin. Specifically a banana muffin with walnuts, but this one is banana nut. I don't know if it's walnuts, but we're gonna pretend like it is. Is this a well-balanced breakfast? No. But this is what Triss is eating. This is what I'm eating. All right, we are 4 hours and 4 minutes in? Yeah, 4 hours and 4 minutes in, and I have finished Divergent. So before I finish talking about this, let's do a quick summary of what happened. At the beginning, we're introduced to Beatrice, or Triss is what she goes by later in the book, and she has been raised in a faction known as Abnegation. she's 16 years old, so she goes and gets a test done that determines which faction that she should belong with. She gets multiple answers, but she does something in the test that she's not really supposed to, and the test taker says that she's divergent, that she needs to keep this a secret from everybody, and then kind of like deletes her test results and then like verbally reports them instead of using the computer to report them, and says that, hey, she belongs in abnegation. A little while later, when you actually get to choose which faction you go to, because you don't have to choose the faction that your test tells you belong in, she chooses Dauntless. She thinks that she wants to be loud and free and brave, so she goes to Dauntless. She gets there and she finds out that, hey, maybe this isn't as easy as the faction that I grew up in. Dauntless is probably the most limiting of factions that you could belong to. Not everybody makes it in, and they are told there are only 10 open spots, and I believe there are 16 candidates for those 10 spots. So they have to go through an initiation, 3 different levels, and then the top 10 ranked after those 3 levels gets into Dauntless. She's put in a class with other transfers, and then the kids who grew up Dauntless are in a different class. They are ranked within their class, and then they are ranked together. Is it fair that these new kids are ranked with the kids who grew up there? Not really, but that's how it is anyway, because Dauntless doesn't care about fairness. They only care if you're brave or not. The first round of initiation is all about fighting, and the students are paired off against each other, and they just have like fist fights every few days. Timeline's messed up in this, but I'll get to that later. But they have fist fights, and then they're ranked based off of that. The bottom 4, I believe, are kicked out. Triss makes it in, but barely. She's kind of in the middle of the pack. Now, she has been told by multiple people throughout this process that, like, we know you're divergent, you have to hide it. Like, stay in the middle of the pack. Don't let anybody know you're special. You want to be ignored. In the second round, which no one is kicked out at the end of this, you're ranked, but no one's kicked out, they go through simulations where they have to face their fear, right? And Triss is really, really good at this because she's divergent, and people keep telling her, like, hey, stop standing out. People are gonna know you're divergent, and that's gonna get you killed. Here's all these examples of people who are being killed for being divergent, and she doesn't listen. And she breezes through this, but when it actually comes time for ranking, she ranks the lowest because in that simulation, she's facing somebody else's fear, and the fear is being kidnapped by, like, maskless men. A few days prior, she was kidnapped and almost killed by some of her classmates who were jealous of her, so this kind of unlocked a new fear from her, and she kind of, like, shut down and then ranked bottom. But no one's getting kicked out this time, so it doesn't matter that she ranks bottom. The next and final round is the students go through testing their own fears. They have to go in public. It's like a big ceremony, and they have a fear landscape. They know it's a simulation. Everybody knows it's a simulation in this case, and they just kind of have to, like, fight through their fears like an obstacle course. The more fears you have, the longer it's probably going to take you to do this, and the better you are able to face your fear, the faster you do it. This is all based off of how quickly you get through your fears. Now, Triss being divergent, she's really, really good at this, and she doesn't, like, stop herself at any point during this simulation and think, like, hey, maybe it's a bad idea that I'm really good at this and I should try to be more of the middle of the pack. No, she shoots up from being like mid-tier to bottom tier all the way to number 1 with combined points from all 3. She does so well in the final round, she's number 1. So this girl is not good at hiding this divergent thing, right? No matter how many people tell her, she does not want to listen. as this has been going on, she falls in love with their like instructor or mentor, whatever his name is for. They kind of fall in love and kind of start this relationship throughout, but it's very much a teenage relationship. Like there's kissing and nothing really, like kissing and I love yous, but nothing really other than that. There's no like sex or anything like that. This is a firmly YA thing. Triss also she's making friends. She befriends some other transfers that are in her actual class. She's so fearless when it comes to heights, which is a big thing in this book, that she ends up befriending some of the kids who already came from Dauntless. And she just kind of like, she just becomes friends with a lot of people. Like she's the popular girl. One of her friends early on is a guy named Al. He's also a transfer, and between him and Triss they make a lot of bad decisions in the way that they treat each other, and Al ends up committing suicide. So you have like that. There's a bunch of revelations throughout the book. Triss finds out that her mother came from Dauntless originally and transferred into the Abnegation faction, and now Triss has chosen to go back to where her mother came from without really even knowing that's where her mother came from. We find out that Four is the son of a leader in the Abnegation faction, and he left Abnegation for Dauntless because his father was abusive and he was just trying to escape his father. So a lot of revelations in there, a lot of things going on. After the final test, Triss is #1, big celebrations everywhere. We know we're at the end of the book. And then that night, after everybody's done partying, Triss is woken up by the movement of the other kids in her class, and they're walking around like robots. And so she follows them, trying to figure out what's going on. Everybody seems to be mind controlled, but she's immune. And then she finds out that her faction has been taken over by the Erudite faction, who is like smarts. Erudite wants to be the leaders, but Abnegation is not giving up that leadership position. So Erudite brainwashes all of the Dauntless people, sends them out to attack and destroy the Abnegation. No one else in this world has guns except for Dauntless, so this is a very quick, we're wiping out your entire faction. So of course Triss is immune to all of this because she's Divergent, and she's very quickly spotted out as a Divergent and sent to die. Triss's mother saves her, but then later gets killed in the escape. Then Triss goes and finds her father and brother and some other hidden Abnegation people, and goes back to the Dauntless compound to stop the attack on Abnegation. Four has been caught in this and like brainwashed again. Like he was free at the beginning, but then he got like a stronger serum, blah 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 blah. And she has to like sacrifice herself and let Four put a gun to her head and nearly kill her for him to snap out of it. Why that works doesn't make sense at all, but it's her selflessness that makes her brave, and that's what we're trying to see in here. So Four snaps out of it. They free all of the Dauntless people who are brainwashed, and then they all flee to Amity, I think is what it is, to start their lives in the next book. Like this could be a standalone book. We all know it's not, and it's only gonna go downhill from here, but this is a complete story in and of itself. The biggest problem I had with this book is like the time frame that this takes place over. Like it is not a very clear time frame. Is this happening over like a few days, a few weeks, months even? Like none of that is clear. It feels like as you're reading it, like it's just happening over like 3 or 4 days. But at one point Triss makes comments about how her pants don't fit anymore because she's got muscles in her leg that she never had before from all the fighting. And that's not something that happens in 3 or 4 days, no matter how hard you're working out. So this has to be something that's taken place over a period of weeks, if not months, but it's just not ever clearly, like the timeline is not ever clearly set, which makes it a little bit confusing. about how long these things that she's going through are actually taking. Younger me thought Triss was like a heroine. She's like the best character. She's so strong, and she's like such an easy insert character that just like, I want to be like Triss. Adult me sees that Triss is a really flawed person. She's very selfish a lot of times, and she says she is selfish, but as a teenager you don't really see it as selfishness. As an adult you definitely see the selfishness. And she's just frankly unkind when it comes to like her interactions with Al, and how much she seems to just hate him for being weak in her eyes. Like, this kid is depressed and he made the wrong choice, and she just sees him as weak and unworthy. Like, when he does commit suicide, she is disgusted by that. Like, he's not strong, he's weak, that's gross. All sorts of horrible thoughts like that, which made me realize that Triss isn't like a very good person. She's not a heroine, she's a flawed teenage girl. Then we get to like Triss and For's relationship. Like, they're both badasses, and that's what you see as a kid, is like these two are badasses. He supports her, he thinks that she can fend for herself and doesn't need a man, and that's great and super supportive. That's not what this relationship is. For has had a very, very traumatic childhood, and he's got a lot of unresolved trauma from that childhood, and often it takes out the trauma that he lived on Triss. He's needlessly cruel to her sometimes, which as a teen that translated to he's being cruel to her to support her, to show her how to be dauntless, and that's not what it is. He's just being needlessly cruel, and then when she tries to call him on it, he gaslights her by saying, I'm only doing this for you. This is not a very good, like, her and For's relationships is not a love story. It is, she is what he wants to be, like, as far as like inner strength, and every once in a while he gets a cruel streak about it and is like, I should be better than you, so I'm going to put you down to show you that I'm better than you. And then when she's like, hey, what the F is going on with this? He's like, I'm just protecting you. And then she's like, oh, I need you so much. You're my support, my rock. And he's not. He's gaslighting her. They just kind of like get mushed in more and more together in a relationship through all the new trauma that they're both going through together. So shared trauma, building a relationship that probably shouldn't have existed in the first place. And then, as I said in the summary, she is told repeatedly to hide her divergence, and she doesn't do it at all. Like, at all. So it is absolutely no surprise that she got caught as a divergent, and she should have died at the end of this book. Like, easily, if her mother didn't come to save her, she would have been dead. There was nothing that she could have done to save herself. Her mother saved her. That is the end of Divergent. Next up, we're slipping into Insurgent, and there's a note. There's a blank note card in here. We're gonna read Insurgent next and see where the story goes from here. Keep in mind, our characters are now on the run from their faction, and factions are falling apart. So what does that look like in the second story, and where will this go? Alright, I am done with Insurgent. 8 hours and 31 minutes into this, so plenty of time. 16 hours to read one book. I got plenty of time to finish. Definitely gonna complete under the 24 hours. But Insurgent, totally upside down when I held it up the first time. Okay, this picks up immediately after the first book. So like starting a new chapter, starting a new sentence, like immediate aftermath. They're on the train heading to Amity at the end of book 1, and they're on the train headed to Amity in the first sentence of this book. No time jump, nothing like that. Plot of this book before we get into like my thoughts. They are headed to Amity looking for safety, right? So they get there, stay for a little while, have to leave because Erudite / bad guy Dauntless shows up, right? Then they go someplace else, and then they argue, and then they have to leave, and then, yeah. This is a trend for at least 200, 300 pages of the book. They go someplace for safety, Triss and Four argue about really pointless shit, the bad guys show up, and then they have to flee to the next location of safety. Eventually Janine, the leader of the Erudite, starts mind controlling Dauntless people to like jump off buildings, and Triss gives herself up to stop this, right? And then she gets tortured and all these experiments are run on her, and that, I mean, that's like, that happens like here in the book. This is all them running and arguing. But when that happens, the book really just kind of falls apart, which I'm going to come back to, but let's finish out the plot line here. So she gets tortured, then she gets saved by Peter. That was his name, right? Names are just not my thing today. She gets saved by Peter because he owes her for her saving his life on accident earlier in the book. Then it's back to, you know, running and the factionless and the non-traitorous Dauntless team up, and they're gonna attack Erudite. But Erudite is protected. Triss doesn't think this is a good idea. She teams up with Four's father to like uncover some secret that only the abnegation leaders knew, that is like the entire reason for this Erudite attack on everybody to begin with. Erudite doesn't want the secret to get out, but it's supposed to get out. Like, abnegation was supposed to tell everybody this at a certain point. The secret is the cause of everything. And so Triss is trying to sneak into the compound with the help of Amity to like announce this to everybody. So sneak in, get through all these traps, and then Janine's killed by a Divergent woman who's kind of like prevalent throughout the story. Not a main character, but like a main side character, because Janine killed her side character's brother. And then Triss is dragged off as a traitor, right? And then she's been fighting with Four this whole time, and she's like, you don't really love me because you don't trust me. Four secretly trusts her, and then he sneaks into Janine's computer and then broadcasts this big secret. So that is like the worst told plot ever, but there you go. That book's heavy, so I'm gonna put it down. So let's talk about this book. First off, way too long. We don't need this much of the book being super repetitive, where flee, think you're safe, fight with Four, escape. It happens a lot. It's very unnecessarily. It could have happened once and we could have moved on with the story. I guess Veronica Roth just wanted to really like set up the fact that Four and Triss don't really have a very good relationship at all. Like, they're supposed to be in love, and they tell each other, like at the end of the story, it's like, I love you. They like cling to each other, but this is a love built of trauma, and it's very obvious that these two weren't really meant for each other. This is not a very good dystopian love story. So, yeah, don't go into this one for the love story because it kind of sucks. They just argue and hate each other, lie to each other, betray each other most of the books. So, yeah. Anyway, big plot twist in here is we've got Caleb ends up being a traitor. Caleb is Triss's brother, and she trusts him because he's her brother, and then ends up betraying her. And then Peter, who everybody thought was the bad guy from the first book because he was such a bully and such an asshole, ends up kind of being a good guy in saving Triss. Again, this is one of those situations where Triss does not save herself. Like the first book, Triss would have died without her mother. This book, she would have died without Peter. And like, she is not the heroine of this story. Other people are saving her in just to like continue the plot. There's no reason that these people should really be saving her, and a lot of times it doesn't make sense. It's just happening to continue the plot. While Triss is captured, like, everything starts going south with this story. Book 1 and even like the repetitiveness of book 2 like make sense in the end. There are dystopian yet believable stories, but it just kind of starts going off the rail and there's like huge plot holes. For example, Janine is a scientist. She's the leader of Erudite because she is the smartest person there. She lives for experimentation. She lives for creating these mind control serums in different ways, and she's devoted her entire life to this. Yet she does 3 experiments on Triss. 3. And then has a complete total breakdown when none of those 3 work, and Triss overcomes all of them. Like, that's not how scientists work. And you can't, like, it's not believable in any way, shape, or form that somebody who's dedicated her entire life to science is gonna try 3 things and then give up and murder your test subject because the 3 things I tried didn't work. Why are we supposed to believe this? Why is even a teenager supposed to believe this? Like, you go through science classes in high school. Even a teenager will try more than 3 things before just dramatically giving up. The other thing is, she says that she's giving up on Triss, but she has 4 as a backup. So she's just going to use 4 and continue the experiments. But the entire reason she was using Triss in the first place is because Triss is like super divergent, and she just cannot be controlled by any serums or anything. Like, nothing works on Triss, and so the idea is to create a serum so powerful it works on the most powerful divergent. We already know from book 1 that there's a serum that worked just fine on 4, and it ended up being Triss who broke him out of that. But if she hadn't like gone out of her way to break him out of that, he would have never done it on his own. So why are you continuing experiments on a guy you already have a serum that controls? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Another thing is when 4 shows up, he kind of tells Triss, like, you're scheduled for execution in 14 days, and we're gonna send people to save you, right? Triss is there as a guinea pig. They plan to keep her there for as long as it takes to, you know, figure out how to create the super serum, right? So why would she have an execution date, like, scheduled? Why did that? Doesn't make any sense. And then she didn't even manage to make it to the execution date. So why was that even a plot point? Because in no world does it make sense to have an execution date that, like, publicly known even to your enemies on somebody who's there for the sole purpose of being an experiment. Like, she's not there to be executed. She's there to be an experiment. They're going to experiment on her until they figure out this serum, this super serum, and then once they figured it out and she's no longer useful, they're going to kill her. You don't set a 14-day execution date for something like that. And that takes us back to like the big problem with the whole series in the beginning is they separate, like Veronica Ross separated these people into factions because that is what was popular at the time. You have Turf Lady with her schoolhouses that was like widely popular, and then you had Hunger Games with like the different districts that wasn't really based off of personality, but they all had like agriculture or mining or fishing, like whatever. They all had like distinct things, but people don't boil down to one singular like personality trait. Like no one has only one personality trait. There's not only 5 personality traits in humanity's existence. Like it didn't make any sense to begin with, though book 1 dealt with this well, and then the more it starts to break down, the less sense it makes. That's why people never really talk about what Divergent faction they are. And that brings us to the end of the book, where this huge revelation was revealed. That is the most redundant thing I've said in a long time. But the big thing, people were put into this city as an experiment, and they were, all of their memories were wiped, and they were divided into these factions. And then once people started showing up as divergent and not easily fitting into factions, like widespread, they are supposed to venture outside of their walls and find the rest of society. And that's the big revelation. Like that's it. And Janine's goal based off of that information is to kill every single divergent in existence, wipe out an entire faction because they're going to share this information because the conditions were met, and then just to stay in their hole. What scientist does something like that? Like, what's the purpose? Why wouldn't you explore outside of the gates and see how you and these divergents were supposed to help humanity? Like, that's worth killing people over? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, many YA books that I've read that have gotten very popular, it does clearly feel like Veronica Roth had one book idea in mind with this, and that book is finished, and then they're like, hey, let's make this into a series and make you some more money. And then she has to like finish off a series that was not originally part of the plan in her head, and she's struggling and it's going off the rails. None of this makes sense, which leads us to Allegiant. And it's about to get even worse. So Allegiant's up next. Oh, I don't think I'm ready for this. I don't think I'm ready for the ending of this book. It's so bad. It's so bad. But let's pop this one open and get to it. Triss's first meal as a Dauntless was a hamburger, and she had never had a hamburger before in her entire life up to this point, so she was kind of confused by it. So obviously we have to get a hamburger for lunch. I just went with McDonald's because it's cheap, it's plain, good enough. Let's close out this vlog and talk about the shit show that was Allegiant. Okay, editing me here, jumping in, not because of the mascara smeared under my eyes in the previous clip, but it was nonsensical and impossible to edit. The book itself was nonsensical, so it makes sense I had trouble speaking about it, but I've tried to like actually outline my thoughts on a piece of, well, it's not a piece of paper, it's a Word document in front of me so I can better talk about this book without having to look at the smeared mascara trying to figure out that mess. Anyway, Allegiant, my nightmare. I'm going to attempt to give a summary. I will try to be as succinct as possible, but there's a lot going on. This is like a thick book. There's a lot going on. It's a fucking mess. You should be able to tell by like the rest of this video that I was really into book 1. It was going well. I had lots of check-in times. Book 2 and book 3 were just like, what am I reading? And I had no real check-in moments. I was just trying to make it through them. In the end, I will probably say this later, but this should have just been one book. Let's get into the summary. First, let me introduce you to Evelyn. Evelyn is Four's mother. We were told in book 1 that she had died, but she was never actually dead. She ended up being banished from abnegation and was part of the factionless. She became a factionless leader. When Janine dies at the end of Insurgent, Evelyn takes over as the city's leader and becomes just as much of a horrible dictator as Janine ever was. Like, nothing got better, it's just a different kind of bad. She also doesn't want to, like, save the world, which was the mission that their ancestors laid out for them. She just wants to abolish the factions. I should also note here that she hates Triss. I guess because no one is good enough for her little boy, which is its own problem, but the reason why she hates Triss so much is never really explained. Let's just say her hatred for Triss comes up a lot and creates a mostly pointless fake breakup subplot at the beginning of the book. I don't care about like what's going on in the beginning of the book while they're still in the city of Chicago, so I'm going to skip ahead and say that eventually Triss, Four, and a handful of others decide that they have to leave the city, go outside the walls and discover what's happening with the rest of the world. Once they escape, there's not a really big escape scene there. They discover that Chicago and the factions are part of an experiment to cure humanity after a gene alteration thing went horribly wrong a few generations ago. So we're told there's now 2 types of people. You have genetically pure people and genetically damaged people. Before the experiments that damaged all of these genes, there was no such thing as human conflict. Everyone was peaceful. But after these experiments, and the genes were damaged, war broke out and decimated the entire population of the Earth. As a reader, and knowing that this is supposed to be like our future, we know this is bullshit. Like, wars happen now, and there's no genetically damaged people. But I think it's supposed to show that like history is very easily rewritten by the victors. We're also introduced out here that every faction has a serum. So we've seen Dauntless's serum a lot, like the fear landscape, so showing people their fears. Candor we've experienced previously. Candor, their serum is like a truth serum. It forces people to tell the truth. Amnity's serum, I think we meet in book 2 in Insurgent. It's a very, very small part of it, but it makes people happy. It's basically weed. Erudite's serum mind controls people, obviously. The only faction that we never really knew what their serum was, or if they even had a serum, was Abnegation, but it turns out that they do have a serum that wipes people's memories. And then we also find out there's a 6th serum that's known as the Death Serum. I bet you can imagine what the Death Serum does. The big plot reveal in here is that while Triss, perfect Triss, is genetically pure, we discover that Four is not. Four is genetically damaged. And Four has a breakdown about this because he's no longer the hero he sees himself as. So he and Triss go back to fighting a lot because his ego can't take the fact that he is not the perfect man that he thinks he is. We're also introduced to a bunch of new characters. One of them, I can't remember her name. She's not really that important. She just moves the plot forward, let's say. She wants to be in a relationship with a Four. She is trying to like break up Four and Triss. Four needs to be with his own genetically damaged kind and not with this uppity, genetically pure girl. She is a leader of this uprising, and she brings Four into the uprising, but tells him to keep it all a secret from Triss. Meanwhile, Triss thinks this genetically pure and genetically damaged thing is a whole load of shit. Four says he won't hide anything from Triss, so he like brings her in to this plot to overthrow the leaders of this like scientific facility that they're in. They're going to use a memory serum to wipe all their memories, thus enabling the genetically damaged to take over the research facility. There is a memory serum in the research facility, but it's in this vault that only David, who's the leader of this facility, has access to. And there's a trap inside the vault that if David doesn't enter a specific code, it releases the death serum and kills anybody who tries to enter the vault. Triss hears this plan and she's like, this doesn't feel right. Like, something about this doesn't feel right. The plan doesn't seem well put together. I feel like they're not telling us everything. Four accuses Triss of being jealous. It's like, you're just jealous because this girl likes me. You don't think this plot's a bad idea. You just don't want me to be happy. There's nothing wrong with this. You're just jealous. As always, a bunch of arguments ensue between the two of them. Four goes ahead with this plan, and then Triss stops it. Triss is correct. The rebels didn't share all the information, and they bombed the facility in order to create a diversion to break into the safe, and which killed one of Triss and Four's friends from Chicago who like came with them. They also find out that they weren't after a memory serum, they were after death serum. So it's like death serum protected by death serum. Whatever. And they were gonna kill everybody and not wipe their memories. Four's a douchebag, like we always knew. Nothing's changed. Triss isn't a great character, but Four is really not a great love interest. And they break up after this. And in this argument that ensues with their breakup, Triss gives my favorite line of this entire book, which is, it's the same thing over and over again. You don't respect me as much as you say you do. And you know what? Hell yeah, girl, stand up for yourself. You don't need no man. Now we're really going off the rails. Because Triss saved David's life, she is initiated as a future leader of the genetically pure. She's too young to just instantly take over a leadership position, but she's kind of like in training. Four is acquitted of his crimes. It was basically like you're new to this area, you were tricked, you didn't know what was really going on. You are going to be monitored and you're on probation, but we're not gonna like banish you or put you in jail or anything like that. Then we go off the rails. There is a war between the factionless and the factions going on Chicago, and David's plan is to use the memory serum to wipe everybody's memory and start the experiment over again. It's just standard practice. Like, if something happens and the community starts warring with each other, we don't want a lot of people to die off because we're trying to cure these damaged genes, and so we're gonna wipe everybody's memory, put them back in their factions, and kind of not really start over, but just continue on with more generations until everybody's all happy and cured. Triss doesn't like this idea because, like, all of her friends and family left in the city are gonna lose all their memories. They're not gonna, like, she just doesn't like it. She thinks people should have control of their own destiny and not just have their memories wiped because they're guinea pigs. I mean, makes sense to me. I get it, kind of. So Triss plans to stop the memory wipe from happening in pretty much the same way that the rebels initially outlined, in using the memory serum to wipe everybody's memory inside the research facility. Basically to make them forget that they cared about genetically pure versus genetically damaged. Why Triss thinks it's not okay to wipe the memories of people in Chicago, but it is okay to wipe the memories of the researchers, is never really clearly explained. Like, all of her reasonings that she wants to stop the memory wipe still applies, but for some reason she's okay with it. The other problem is, like, this is a nationwide issue of, like, genetically pure versus genetically damaged, and I'm not really sure how they think they're gonna fix this, like, segregation or this class system by wiping out the memories of one single research facility. Also not explained, I have no answers for you. The other problem is, like, this war inside the city is still happening, so they have to figure out a way to stop it. The plan for that is 4 is going to sneak back into the city and wipe the memory of either his mother or his father, because his mother controls the factionless and his father controls the factions. So apparently wiping the memories of one of the two is going to enable this entire war to end, which also doesn't make any sense. But I can't tell you how many times this book does not make sense. I cannot explain any of this to you because I am confused. The problem that they have is somebody has to die in order to get the memory serum out of the vault. Like, they know David is never going to give up the code, so somebody's gonna have to die. I'm not sure how this works either, because they have enough memory serum to wipe out everybody's memory in Chicago, and they don't need to get into the vault to get access to that memory serum. So why wouldn't they just go steal that memory serum and use it on the researchers? Like, why do they need access to this vault? They're not going after the death serum, which is only kept in the vault. They're going after a serum that seems to be readily accessible at all times. Again, nothing makes sense. So Caleb, Triss's brother, volunteers to die, basically, to get access to the memory serum. He's betrayed Triss multiple times throughout the series, and this is the way he decides that he's going to prove he loves Triss, by being a true abnegation and sacrificing himself for the greater good. 4 and a couple people go off to the city to wipe either his mother or father's memories, and then Triss and a couple other people are overthrowing this research facility from the inside. Obviously, Triss is like, Caleb, you can't die for me. You don't really want to die. And then she goes and does it herself, right? In the end, it ends up that 4 doesn't wipe either one of his parents' memories, and then he ends up striking a deal with his mother and then some other leader who is like a co-leader with his father to end the war. And I don't know why that wasn't the plan to begin with. I still don't understand how wiping anybody's memory would have fixed anything, but again, no one asked me. And then while he is there doing that, Triss goes in, gets exposed to this serum, and finds out she is so divergent, not even the all-powerful death serum works on her. Holy shit, she is the most divergent thing ever. No serums work on her. It doesn't make sense why the serum doesn't work on her. Like, it works on all the other genetically pure people, but it doesn't work on Triss because of her true divergence. It doesn't make sense. Funny thing though, Triss still dies. She gets shot. She dies. So all of this bullshit, she's still dead at the end of the book. She's not coming back. There is no plot armor protecting her. I mean, there was the plot armor that protected her from the serum, but then she gets shot. I hate it so much. And then the last part of the book is just 4 being sad in mourning Triss's death, right? If that summary sounded stupid and confusing, it's because the book was stupid and confusing. Alright, the memory card's almost full, so super quick summary of my thoughts. This book was different from the other two in that it had like alternating chapters or alternating perspectives. You'd get a chapter from 4, then a chapter from Triss, a chapter from 4, chapter from Triss. I don't think that the perspective were written differently enough that it was easy to identify who was the perspective character in any given moment, right? So I get why they did it, because Triss dies at the end, but it wasn't well done. Insurgent, book 2, left us with a ton of plot holes, and in a significant portion of Allegiant attempted to explain away a lot of those plot holes, and making the middle of this book feel like an info dump. When I talked about the first book, I said that Veronica Roth did a really good job of explaining the universe without info dumping. Not so much in this one. This is just a straight up info dump. It was boring. We don't like that. And the last thing I wanted to say is people don't hate this book because Triss died. Like, yes, it's stupid she died, but people don't hate it because she died. They hate it because this book doesn't make sense. This is an objectively bad book. This should never have been a series. It should have been a standalone novel with a slightly different ending to the first novel, and then this would have been beloved. But the fact that she extended this story that didn't need to be extended into 3 novels without having like a good idea of where she was going ended up making this whole thing suck. And I'm sorry if you love this. Please tell me why you love this in the comments below, because I really want to know if it's like nostalgia or if you understood something that happened in book 2 and book 3 that just didn't make any sense to me at all. Right, back to Raccoon Eyes to finish this video out. And that brings us to the end of the Divergent series and why everybody hates the Divergent series. Divergent itself, 4 stars. Great story, really well told. I liked it. It should have been a standalone. Insurgent, 3 stars. It's very repetitive, very slowly moving the plot along. Allegiant, half of it's an info dump, just fixing plot holes from Insurgent, and the other half is just a hot, trashy mess. She doesn't know what this book was supposed to be. We're just trying to make some money, I guess. But yeah, that's the Divergent series for you. Let me know down in the comments below any other YA series that you would like me to do a deep dive into and reread. See you in the next video. Bye!